What's up, fellas? Hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Hopefully, this works. I tried doing this once already and my camera froze, so hopefully, it works this time. I got in a little Twitter conversation with my name is Ozymandias, the Welsh Ugandan, and Joseph A.P. Wilson, where they want to accuse everyone of being a racist, radical, and all this kind of nonsense. And we ended up talking a little bit about NAGPRA, and the Welsh Ugandan watched my video and responded to it. So I'm going to take a look at his response here and just do a quick address of it. This will be a short video. So I'll read through his responses and then, give my response. Yes, I watched the video. I didn't read the paper because it seemed to me you read most of it out. I've never worked in the US and therefore NAGPRA isn't really my area. But I do have a number of observations. Firstly, your video was a polemic rather than a balanced piece. Your position seems to be that whilst you accept that many of the Native American artifacts in question were added to collections inappropriately, you don't believe that modern Native Americans have the right to determine their future. Right off the bat, entirely wrong. I absolutely do not acknowledge that most of the artifacts were added to collections inappropriately. In fact, I very specifically in the video mentioned bodies. There are some examples of some inappropriate things happening with human remains. And I also believe I'm highly skeptical of the narrative. I mean, you can look at what's going on in Canada right now with the schools, hundreds of bodies, mass graves, right? Except there are no bodies there. It's a completely fabricated story. They were given $12 million to dig, and then they refused to dig because they know there's no bodies there. They don't want to dig it up because then it ends the scam, right? And so I think a lot of this narrative is massively overblown. But I wouldn't be surprised if there were some genuine examples of inappropriateness. And I've at least heard stories. I don't know entirely how true they are, but I've at least heard stories of like bodies being stolen, graves being robbed, like not ancient graves, but relatively modern graves. And so I can totally understand why people would object to that. It doesn't necessarily reflect my own personal feelings, but I do understand why others would feel that way, and I don't even think it's entirely unreasonable for others to feel that way. So I was simply acknowledging that there may have been some legitimate reasons for this law to be in place, which was initially focused on the bodies, right? Not artifacts. And I never once said that about artifacts, nor would I ever say that about the artifacts. I did acknowledge one specific instance of grave goods being on display of, I believe, someone's great uncle. That's a relatively close familial tie and close in time as well. Obviously, time is a very important factor in all of this. And again, it's not my own personal feelings, but I understand others' feelings for feeling that's gross, feeling it's too recent. And so that is what I was referring to. Certainly not what you're saying, not even close to it. And then Native Americans have the right to determine their future. Future is a very interesting word to use here because we're talking about the past, and I specifically talk about the most ancient past. For example, the Kennewick Man, an 8,000-year-old skeleton who had little to no genetic relations to modern Native Americans and little to no cultural relations to modern Native Americans. And yet, for years, scientists were denied access while Native Americans were given access. And they ended up even stealing some of the bones from the body. And then it was buried in a secret location, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. No, they certainly should not have any right to determine the very ancient past, in the same way that absolutely no one is crying for modern pagans and demanding that they have the right to Rome's history and that they should control all of the bodies and artifacts there. It's a completely ridiculous argument to make. And so, yes, Native Americans do not have a right to just claim humanity's past and control it. Because to do so is anti-scientific and ahistorical. Yes, I agree with that part. And pretty much everything stems from that. You seem unwilling to accept that they might consider mundane objects to be imbued with spiritual power. A lot of this is just modern woke bullshit. This narrative of, everything being spiritual seems to be largely a modern creation. And when we're talking about literal human feces, scraps of human hair, animal bones that were not involved in any ritual but simply were eaten, in normal everyday life and things along those lines, literal trash from middens, yeah, that is completely ridiculous that they've all been dubbed universally across the board, literally anything that a Native American has ever made contact with, as sacred and spirit imbued with spiritual power. Yeah, that's a completely ridiculous narrative, and I fully reject it. Yet there are hundreds of Catholic churches across the world where slivers of wood are revered as fragments of the true cross, rusty nails are believed to have crucified Christ, bones are kept in the belief that they belong to saints and are capable of performing miracles. Well, is this a totally false equivalency? Are any of those churches taking those artifacts from museums? Were those artifacts found in archaeological digs that the churches are then demanding be handed over to them and withheld from scientific study? And if they are, I'm fully against that. Yes, I think that should not be the case. I don't believe that is the case. I'm not familiar with what scraps of wood specifically you're referring to here, but I'm unaware of churches, approaching museums and archaeologists and going, you don't have the right to these objects, these are ours, and taking physical possession of them and dictating what gets published on them and what studies are done on them. There's a big difference between those two situations. So total false equivalency there. And we could find similar in most religions or cultures. And again, if most religions and cultures are demanding that archaeologists stop their research and hand over these artifacts, yes, I'm fully against that. There's no hypocrisy here on my side. But there's a big difference between, private possession and demanding the return of something that was found on an archaeological dig, right? Moving on to NAGPRA, whilst archaeologists were consulted in drawing it up, they did not create it, but they do have to pay heed to it. It seems that much of your ire at NAGPRA is directed at the archaeologists. It certainly is, who have to abide by it. Well, you're completely missing the part, right, where I talk about the commentary on the law, and overwhelmingly, there were a total of 2 comments from archaeologists saying, hey, I think this law is overstepping. I think this law is going too far. And overwhelmingly, the archaeologists and the institutions either supported this law and its update, this massive sweeping update that broadened its scope unbelievably so, or they were actually demanding that it go even farther. They were saying this law is no good because it doesn't give enough control to the Native Americans. So it's not simply abiding by it. It's not like the archaeologists are just going, oh, well, it's the law, so we have to abide. No, they're demanding, they wanted this, and they want even more of it. So again, just a completely ridiculous line there from you. Of course, museums remove displays and in some cases shut. Not to do so would put them in a contravention of NAGPRA. Right. And you again are ignoring the fact that the majority of large institutions have taken the stance, not only after this update, but even before this update, that returning literally everything that I don't even like the word repatriation or returning, because it already is setting up the idea that these things actually do belong to them. They're returning them to the rightful owners. They're not. Again, Kennewick Man, which wasn't actually NAGPRA, but close enough, right? They have no right to that body, and it wasn't returned to them. It was given to a tribe that had no association with it. But most of these large institutions have the stance that repatriating literally everything is the right approach. So So again, it's not just like, oh, they're just following the law. No, they very vocally discuss how they want to destroy archaeology. They want to literally return every single artifact to these tribes. Most are working to ensure that they comply with the act, identify the appropriate tribal groups, and liaise with them about the future of items. You're also ignoring the fact that hundreds of tribes that are not federally recognized are legally excluded from this process. The universities are not allowed to acknowledge them. They are not allowed to return these things to potential actual rightful owners, and are even forced to return them to tribes that maybe even enslaved these tribes, were at war with these tribes, are, directly opposed to these tribes. It's absolutely ridiculous. The archaeologists are not innocent here. They're not acting in good faith here. Yes, my gripe is absolutely with the archaeologists. What else are they supposed to do? Not comply with the law? Again, you're ignoring the examples of the guy with the masks, right? How he happily returned these recreations that were sold to that university for display by this tribe. And then years later, a tribal member comes up and goes, no, those are sacred. We have to return those. And he explicitly explains how the Native Americans are free to change their mind about any of these things at any time for any reason, and it is not his place to question them, and it is only his place to listen and do as he is told, and he will happily do exactly that. This was all before this update went into place, right? They're not just following the law, they're taking every opportunity to go above and beyond it. So, again, just nonsense from you. I also have to say that throughout the characterization of archaeologists as nothing but radicalized left-wing zealots, because they are, forcing predetermined narratives on the evidence does you no credit. Well, these are verifiable facts. Archaeology is over 99% left-leaning. It's gotten completely out of control. You can look simply at Joseph in this thread, who is repeatedly making accusations of racism and radicalism, and then entirely unable and unwilling to back up those claims at all. He accused me of being a racist radical, and I asked him, provide me evidence. You say it's the main thing I do. He hasn't been able to even define the terms he's using or give one example of me doing it. Yes, you people are all lunatic left-wing zealots. Especially when the only archaeologist you cite by name is strongly opposed to NAGPRA. This is the funniest line in your whole response. Yes, I cite one archaeologist by name, and she is literally the only active archaeologist who is opposed to NAGPRA. She is literally the only one who is vocally outspoken against NAGPRA. That is not a slam dunk on me. That's a slam dunk on yourself, you utter moron. She's the only one. Now, I have had other archaeologists contact me privately and express their views that they are also opposed to NAGPRA, but they do not speak about this publicly because the other archaeologists are such left-wing zealots, and they know that if they were to speak out against NAGPRA, that they would be treated in the exact same way that Elizabeth Weiss has been treated. Her life was turned upside down by you left-wing zealots. So, an absolutely ridiculous thing for you to say there that, oh, well, you cited an archaeologist who's against it. Yes, she's literally the only one. Good God. The issue of decolonization, oh, what a beautiful buzzword. The issue of decolonization in the presence of large numbers of inappropriately collected artifacts. What are these inappropriately collected artifacts? How are they inappropriately collected? See, that's the thing. Because you are all left-wing zealots, you believe that all of the artifacts are inappropriately collected because you believe that archaeology itself is an act of colonization, is an act of oppression and racism. And so you want to undo that. You want to undo archaeology itself. I do not acknowledge that there's a large number of inappropriately collected artifacts, not for a second. But of course, archaeologists believe that all of them are inappropriately collected. We have to return all of them, right? Has been a topic of debate in the archaeological and museum world for decades now. Yes, it has been. And it's interesting that 30 years ago, when NAGPRA was first created, when it had far, far, far more limited ability, the debate was split pretty nearly 50-50, and about half the archaeologists were strongly opposed to it because they believed even back then, under those far more limited conditions, that it would restrict archaeology's ability to conduct itself, that it would hinder scientific progress, and that it was a problem. Now, in 2025, like I said, you have one archaeologist who is openly opposed to NAGPRA, and the others are overwhelmingly in support of it. So it seems that you're not really aware of the debate in archaeology that's going on. Ridiculous thing for you to say. With a whole plethora of views expressed. Again, there's not a plethora of views expressed anymore. The views are overwhelmingly in support of it. I appreciate that you may be unaware of these debates. Go fuck yourself. I'm one of the most educated people in the entire world on this topic, but you appear to have made little effort to inform yourself, preferring a crude characterization. Again, I'm one of the most educated people in the world on this topic, so your insults are go fuck yourself. I had an open invitation to archaeologists to debate me on this topic. It was specifically made to Moundlore, who of course did not want to take me up on it, and other archaeologists were well aware of this invitation as well, and they also refused to take me up on it because I have debated them publicly on Twitter. A whole slew of them, I think it was like 5 to 7 different archaeologists, all tried to gang up on me and tell me that everything I was wrong. And they were absolutely humiliated because turns out I actually do know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about incredibly well. And it was a humiliating experience for them, and very few archaeologists are willing to engage me at all on this topic anymore. You obviously weren't aware of that, which is why you're still willing to do so. But yeah, archaeologists have no problem trying to argue with me, no problem trying to call me a radical and a racist and all of these other things. But as soon as I shift the topic to NAGPRA, they immediately disappear. They all stop responding. I wonder why that is. It's because I am so well informed about this, and they know they'd be absolutely humiliated, and their ridiculous actions would be exposed if they were to engage with me. Yes, there is a prevailing view towards repatriation. Oh, I'm glad you at least admit that. Which seems to me and many others to be the respectful position. Yes, the respectful position. It's all about respecting the natives. It's completely ridiculous. There's nothing respectful about returning an 8,000-year-old skeleton to a tribe that has absolutely no association with it and shutting down research and burning and destroying research and returning literal shit. Let's all mail shit to the natives out of respect. It's a frankly completely ridiculous position. If the recipients of repatriated material choose not to make material available for study or choose to bury their ancestors in hidden locations, they have that right. Unfortunately, they do have that right, but they shouldn't have that right. And again, their ancestors, it's not. There's a huge difference between something that, was dug up that's a few hundred years old and something that's dug up that's a few thousand years old. Again, no one is demanding that modern day pagans have control over Roman history because it's a completely ridiculous position, and as soon as you frame it that way, it becomes obviously ridiculous. But for some reason, when it comes to the indigenous communities of Australia and Americas, now all of a sudden it's respectful and it's their right. Completely ridiculous. I see nothing in your video to support your claims of archaeologists going against the science to further the destruction of archaeology as a discipline. Again, demanding the repatriation of literally everything is no evidence of that? Okay, so what would be evidence for you? How far would they have to go before you go, oh, maybe that's too far? When demanding the return of literally everything is no evidence whatsoever, what kind of fucked up worldview do you live in? I note that on 2 occasions you mentioned the claim that there are only 2 biological sexes. Yes, there are, and that early Europeans were black. Possible examples which might fit that characterization. Again, more nuance is needed. Most archaeologists will agree that most humans are either biologically male or female. Would they, though? Is that actually true? Because Elizabeth Weiss gave a talk where she I'll probably butcher the title of this, but make no bones about it. There's only two sexes. That might not be perfect, whatever, something along those lines. But anyways, the entire reason for the talk was because there was so much discussion in archaeology about how you couldn't determine the sex of skeletons by looking at them, which is absolutely untrue. And so she gave this talk to clarify that, yes, you can determine the sex of skeletons by looking at them. And she even specifies, she goes, we're talking about sex here. This is not a commentary on how these people may have expressed their gender. This is not commentary on, the modern transgender movement today. But it is scientifically, looking at the skeletons, you can, with extremely high accuracy, determine the sex of that skeleton. Now, that talk was removed, and a response to that talk was published titled, "The Science is Settled, Sex is Not Binary." So that seems pretty contradictory to what you're saying there, that most archaeologists will agree that most humans are either biologically male or female. No, there's a massive push against this, and I think probably most archaeologists actually would agree with that. Not publicly, certainly not publicly. No, they know that there's massive backlash if they dare to say such a thing. And so the outward-facing narrative is overwhelmingly that that is not true, even though it's a simple statement of biology. With a small portion who are intersex, but draw a distinction between sex and gender, which is a social construct. As for early Europeans, here you must be talking about the Western hunter-gatherers who first occupied Western Europe following the last ice age. DNA studies consistently have shown them to have had dark skin with blue or green eyes. Again, this is just untrue. You look at the Cheddar Man recreation, who the creator of openly admits that he made him dark-skinned for political reasons. You look at the recent game depicting the Picts, which I believe was made in conjunction with archaeologists who depict the Picts as black and transgender. This is, again, an overwhelming thing that's being pushed, and for you to play ignorant is just pure gaslighting, which is exactly what I've come to expect from you radical woke archaeologists. You just lie shamelessly. It's you're just gaslighting here. And if you are genuinely unaware of all of these things, well, you should probably, just shut the hell up and educate yourself a little bit before talking on things that you know literally nothing about. But I think you do know, and you're just gaslighting because you're a shameless liar, like most archaeologists are. The gene for lighter skin only seems to have become widespread after the Bronze Age and the influx of people with stepped ancestry. I'm not going to get into the actual scientific arguments here, but I don't believe that to be true. Certainly not as true as it's presented. Numerous scientific studies agree. If I've missed something or traduced you, I'd be happy to discuss it, but none of this seems to me to fit your claims. I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video and to respond, but everything you're saying there is just ridiculous. Again, genuinely hilarious that you go, oh, gotcha, you mentioned Elizabeth Weiss and she's anti-NAGPRA, so that totally destroys your argument. Literally the only one. Just such pathetic arguments from you, so transparently bullshit and gaslighty. This is why I do have such great contempt for archaeologists. You're a perfect example of that. Joseph in that thread calling me a racist and a radical and then running away like a coward, like he is. Every single other archaeologist, shying away from the NAGPRA debate because, again, they know that I do know what the hell I'm talking about. I know extremely well what I'm talking about. And they know that if they were to debate me, their whole scam would be exposed. And the world might know that they are actively working to destroy archaeology because they are woke zealots who believe that archaeology is a colonial sin and they want to undo all of that damage. So, just a quick video for you, fellas. I hope everyone had a beautiful Thanksgiving. I'm going to enjoy some delicious cheesy potatoes now. So good. Love Thanksgiving food. Peace out, fellas, and have a great rest of your week.